Morning, good afternoon, and good evening. A very, very warm welcome to today's webinar on future priorities for addressing ocean acidification in the Mediterranean, going from science to policy. This webinar is co-organized by IUCN and the Ocean Acidification Mediterranean Hub, supported by the Prince Albert Foundation, and is part of the Monaco Ocean Week. So very warm welcome to this very important topic. Ocean acidification, as you know, is a direct consequence of increased human-induced carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. The ocean have absorbed between a quarter and a third of anthropogenic CO2 emissions during the past 5 decades. But even more recent research has shown that the potential could even be greater than that. The oceans observing more carbon dioxide than first estimated. And while this uptake provides valuable services to human societies by moderating the rate and the severity of climate change, it does come at a cost. The massive input of CO2 generates sweeping changes in the chemistry of seawater. Ocean acidification has an impact on many ocean-related benefits to society, both coastal protection, but also livelihoods and in terms of food and income. And with this generous support from the Prince Albert Foundation, IUCN set up an Ocean Acidification International Reference User Group, RUG for short, which is chaired by Professor Dan Fowley and Dr. John Baxter of IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas. This was set up as a forum to help convey scientific results on ocean acidification to a non-scientific audience and science end users, in particularly policy and decision maker. So the RUG was actually instrumental in raising awareness on ocean acidification globally, and actually bringing it to the highest level by communicating the latest science and highlighting the policy needs. So the RUG project worked with several regions to examine the local status, needs, policy requirements with regards to ocean acidification. The expert workshop were held in different regions. One was held in Colombia, another one in Tanzania, and today we're focused on the Mediterranean. And these activities were also supported by IAEA and the Swedish Ministry of Environment. So we know that the changes are occurring globally, but there are lots of regional differences and variabilities, both in terms of impact, but also on the main drivers. So the objective of this webinar is to get up to date on the latest science, the knowledge gap, and to better understand the future science and policy needs to address ocean acidification in the Mediterranean region. So this will be followed then on looking at the socio-economic considerations, the policy and communication priorities, and finally, how to better engage the southern countries in the Mediterranean. So we'll take a few questions from part 1, but I would also very much encourage you to put your questions in the chat during the session. And then we'll move on to a second part, which is a panel discussion with selected experts from different sectors, including fisheries, aquaculture, but also representatives from government agencies and international organizations that are working on the topic. So with this, we would like to also, the organizers of Monaco Ocean Week, we will make sure that this is actually being recorded, and the sessions will be available in presentations as well. So without any further delay, I would like to welcome, and actually before I would like to hand over the floor to Abed Al-Rahman Hassoun, who is the founder of the OA Med Hub, and which is affiliated with the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network. And he's also currently a research associate in the National Center for Marine Science, affiliated to the National Council of Scientific Research in Lebanon. Please welcome Abed, if you can switch on your camera and join us today. So Abed, over to you. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Hi, Mina. I'm just gonna share my screen. Okay, I hope that it's clear for you now. So thank you so much, Mina, for your introduction. It's a pleasure actually to be here and to start by highlighting the ocean acidification phenomenon, a really important phenomenon that's happening in our unique and amazing Mediterranean Sea, the sea that we share all together, and to also highlight the huge efforts and work activities done so far by the GOA-ON. So first of all, I would like to shed light on the reason behind ocean acidification. Since the Industrial Revolution, CO2 emissions, among other greenhouse gases, were considerably actually emitted through anthropogenic activities, mainly through industrial activities, in a way that atmospheric CO2 has increased from 280 ppm during the pre-industrial period to around 416.46 ppm in February 2021. A huge increase, of course. And you know, usually there is a natural exchange and fluxes between the atmosphere and the sea, exchange of gases like the CO2. This latter, actually, the sea, has been taking in more and more CO2, just like a heavy smoker, due to the exacerbation of the increasing CO2, atmospheric CO2 in the atmosphere. And after a series of chemical reactions in the sea, there is a production of carbonic acid, which decreases the pH of seawater in a phenomenon called and very well known as ocean acidification. So this phenomenon has been observed not only in one oceanic area, but in different and diverse stations from around the world, as shown on the right panel of this slide. So simplified chemical reactions are highlighted here. Ocean acidification eventually decreases the availability of important ions, such as the carbonate ions, essential for many marine organisms like calcifiers. What are calcifiers? They are marine organisms that build their shells and skeletons using carbonate ions, such as aragonite. And this is not local, okay? It is, you can see here in this map, it's affecting the world's oceans, which clearly show the need of a global approach, of a global ocean acidification network, the need of GOA-ON. Okay, so consequently, the vision of GOA-ON is to share actually expertise, to promote data sharing, data access, data exchanges, promote necessary information, guidelines, and methodologies to everyone in order to provide the world with a scientifically valid status of ocean acidification, and to report actually also its effect on marine, coastal resources and habitats and ecosystems, and to give realistic projections on local and global scale. That's why GOA-ON actually is gathering scientists from various institutions and universities, teaming up together with known international organizations that you are all aware about, such as NOAA, IAEA, UNESCO, IOC, IOCCP, GOOS, the Ocean Foundation, and many others, of course. And it is publishing actually best practices, and recently an implementation strategy while promoting for worldwide scientific exchanges through its fascinating mentor-mentee program called peer-to-peer program. Also, GOA-ON has been assisting in the creation of the Sustainable Development Goal 14 with the IOC, especially its indicator 14.3.1, dedicated for ocean acidification data reporting. So in 2013, we were 150 members from 31 countries. And in 2020, this number has been fivefold higher. So we are 800 members from 105 countries. Huge, huh? So ocean acidification is a global condition with local effects. That's why GOA-ON has encouraged actually regional networks, hubs to improve the regional collaborations, exchanges, things like this. And as you can see here, there are 6 regional hubs. One of them is actually our hub, which is the Ocean Acidification Mediterranean Hub, or OA-MED Hub. It's super tiny, the area that covers, but it is surrounded by many countries, as you know. So this hub connects Mediterranean scientists working and interested in ocean acidification in the Mediterranean. We are so far 56 scientists from 10 countries so far, trying to improve the communication between the Mediterranean ocean acidification members to better study and understand the ocean acidification and its consequences in the Mediterranean. How? By promoting community best practices, by simple methodologies and techniques, by supporting the Mediterranean ocean acidification community via capacity building, north, south, east, west trainings and newsletters containing opportunities, projects, calls, proposals, and by promoting as well research balance and justice in the Mediterranean, research justice in the Mediterranean, by working together as a community to provide ocean acidification related messages for policymakers and the public in the Med and beyond as well. So now we are a UN voluntary commitment, and check more about our news on social media accounts. And we are open for discussions as well on the Ocean Acidification Information Exchange website. So sign up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abed, for that very comprehensive overview. And it's really, really great to see this collaboration across the Mediterranean Sea, as you highlighted, from north to south to east to west. So thank you very much. With that, we'll now like to start with the first part, where we're going to have a few presentations from some more scientists. So we'd like to jump to our first presentation on the current state of ocean acidification in the Mediterranean. It will also be followed by looking at the socio-economics. So I would like to very much welcome our next speaker. Delighted to have you with us, Patricia Siver. Please, if you can switch on your camera and join us. Patricia is a research professor of the Catalan Institute for Research and Advanced Studies, part of the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology with the Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona. And her background is in earth science and earth and ocean science. And her work centers around different threats to the marine environment on various timescales, but also the complexity from ocean acidification and climate change to the dispersion and impacts of marine litter, including microplastics. And she's also coordinating and part of several advisory group, a member on this topic. So again, very welcome, and we look forward to your short presentation. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Can you see it properly? Yes?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's really a pleasure to be here today at this event on ocean acidification in the Mediterranean Sea. And first of all, I would like to acknowledge, of course, the organizer and also my co-authors, Michael Grelot, Anaid Rosas, and Jacob Parker. I structured this presentation in three main parts. So first, we are going to see a synthesis of Mediterranean research, focusing on acidification. Then we will look at who is doing the research and where. And then finally, we will see what is the current knowledge, next step, and some perspective. So first of all, we see already that ocean acidification is a chemical process that is directly related to anthropogenic carbon and the accumulation of this anthropogenic carbon in the atmosphere. And since the Mediterranean Sea is relatively warm and saline and also has quite high alkalinity, it also has the propensity to absorb carbon dioxide, including anthropogenic carbon. In addition to this process, it has also a fast overturning circulation, so the anthropogenic carbon is actually penetrating to the entire water masses already. And also, we have some estimate done in the last few years in terms of acidification rates that are showing that acidification rates in the Med in different water masses are actually higher than the global average. Finally, here on the right, you also see a projection of ocean acidification that they were generated by our colleague James Orr and collaborator. And these projections are showing the propagation of acidification in the Mediterranean Sea. So in terms of synthesis, here you see a collection of all papers published on this topic in the Mediterranean, focusing on the Mediterranean. You see different research areas, and it's interesting to see that from 1979, when the very first paper on carbonate chemistry was published, then you have quite a few number until like really 2011, and exactly when this was happening, just before we had this European project on ocean acidification, was a major European effort to address acidification, was not really focusing on Mediterranean, but produced some science, of course, in the Mediterranean as well. But really, this drastic accelerated increase of knowledge was done thanks also to this Mediterranean Sea acidification project. There was also an European collaborative effort, and since then the knowledge has been acquired. There are many papers you see mainly on the biological response. We have also this tail of publication, and finally we reached this plateau in 2018. So in terms of some interesting number related to this status of knowledge, we have 434 papers that they were published on this topic in the Mediterranean, related to Mediterranean OA. 73, so the large majority are dealing with the biological response, smaller proportion on carbonate chemistry, 23%, and then you will see very small percentages, only 4% are dealing with the socio-economic policy matter related to OA. And when we look at the biological response, it's also interesting to see that most of the studies are focusing on the benthic system. Benthics are all these organisms and habitat that live attached to a substrate, and 27% were on planktonic, so pelagic organisms that live in the upper part mainly of the water or the seawater column. And then we selected 140 species. Mainly there were more studies, but there's quite a high numbers already, 140 species tested for acidification. Here also I wanted to show you this trend in publication per country that is I use it as an indicator of collaborative effort, not only about developing, of course, the science and understanding the science, but also collaborative effort of studying acidification in this area. You see that from before this METSI project, there were only a few papers, and mainly in this country, northwestern Mediterranean country. Then when we moved towards the 2011-2015, and eventually 2020, you see that there is a larger number showing like an effort on collaboration, and also the national level, of course, an emphasis on addressing this problem. But you see that even when you see the final picture, combining all the effort, you see that there is, of course, a bias related to publication record, and also in situ studies, I would say, that are all mainly from the northwestern Mediterranean, some also from the North Adriatic Sea, but mainly from this area, and very few from North Africa, Eastern Europe, and also the Balkan region. So in terms of like study type of approach, it's interesting also to see that the Mediterranean has this beautiful side. They are a natural laboratory for studying acidification. There are the CO2 vents. And in fact, when we look at the contribution in terms of science, there is a very large number, 41% of papers that are actually using this natural laboratory, the CO2 vents, for studying this process. And then soon after, just the number, 32% are laboratory studies, so testing future projection of ocean acidification in target organisms typical of Mediterranean Sea. Then we have, of course, field study, mesocosms, and so on. Then when we look at the very generalized pictures of what's happening in the Mediterranean Sea, so the vulnerability of the Mediterranean biological system to acidification, this is, as I said, is a simplified picture, but it's based on a very high number, and it's based on processes. And even if many processes were addressed in these many studies, this one, photosynthesis, abundance, growth, biodiversity, survival and mortality, physiology and classification, are the processes that are most studied, and they are repeatedly studied in many articles. And when you look at these two big blocks of organisms, so the pelagic versus the benthic, already see that the most vulnerable organism species are belonging to the benthic system, and we saw that already as an outcome of the METSI project. But also, I mean, many more studies corroborated this understanding and this impact. And there are like this very important engineering, called engineering species, that are affected by acidification. For example, this very typical endemic coralline algae, for example, or the mollusk, that are also, these systems are also very important from the socio-economic and cultural point of view. There are also some pelagic organisms like pteropods, coccolithophores that are impacted. But it's also important to understand that there are not only negative impact, but there are also some systems that are affected in a positive way, or they have no, basically no response. And these are bacterial communities, sea anemone, algae that are not calcifying, like not coralline algae. So addressing acidification in the Mediterranean Sea, of course, is very important, and we really understand a lot now in terms of species-specific response or endemic habitat to acidification. But of course, the Mediterranean is also very well known for the anthropogenic pressure. Climate is a major issue here. And for example, thermal stress combined with acidification is making us actually the impact on acidification even stronger. So there is a lot of things that needs to be addressed still in terms of understanding the real impact of acidification and climate change on the key habitats of Mediterranean and all the resources that they are providing to us. And in addition to that, there is not only climate, I mentioned, there is also the direct anthropogenic pressure that is sometimes also very local, and this needs to be addressed because with this, otherwise we will not able to address important questions related to adaptation and related to mitigation of the effect. And here, for example, you see the complexity both on land and on the sea of this all combined different processes. So just to conclude, I would like to highlight some major future priority that I think we should consider, and also perspective. You saw that a lot of work has been done, and a lot of particularly in situ study are mainly done in the northwestern Mediterranean. So we need to have a much wider approach in terms of geographical approach. And then also in terms of ecosystem level, there is still a lot of work to do in terms of adaptation and transgenerational studies. They are still limited, and I didn't mention yet, but in terms of like paleo-reconstruction understanding, paleoecology and paleobiology in the Mediterranean Sea, addressing OA, are basically almost not existing. And these are really helpful for understanding the temporal scales of changes that we cannot address with short-term experiment. Social studies are also very minor contribution of our understanding, and we need to understand more about North African, Eastern Mediterranean, and Balkan economy. And that's just to conclude an overarching point is that we need to really think about a new coordinated program or coordinated effort at the basin scale, based on cooperation, of course, and less Eurocentric. And also, we need to have this ecosystem approach, this process approach, but really having cooperation for scientific and societal advancement is a priority. And I think the spirit of collaboration rather than confrontation is really a must. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patricia, again, for another excellent presentation, very, very concise. You can leave your camera on because I'm going to see if we've had any questions. I think you highlighted it, summarizes very well in terms of what the future priority are to address ocean acidification in terms of more in situ, as well as looking more at the ecosystem level and the socio-economic aspect. So further studies on that, and especially focusing on the south part of the Mediterranean. And also the importance, you really highlighted the importance of, basin collaboration and cooperation. But if you were to think about in terms of, this is all part, but how do you improve awareness and make, taking action based on the science a priority to address ocean acidification threats? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity also to actually acknowledge some people that really help us in the Mediterranean region. with a reference user group that was specifically for the Mediterranean, like you mentioned, Dan LaFolly, John Baxter, but also Christian Teleki and Carol Thorley, because they were part of this initiative, this large initiative, and they also help us, to think more about stakeholders, think more about different group of peoples, and how to be even more inclusive. So I think, my opinion is what I said at the very last of my presentation, that is the cooperation of scientists. I mean, also this, in a way, also the self-organization of scientists in the Mediterranean regions to find, basically to find mutual interest and to find strategy that are common strategy in addressing key questions, not only at the national level, in the national water, but also, in other parts, strategic part of the Mediterranean Sea is really, really important.
Thank you very much, Patricia. And once again, thank you for being here with us and for sharing all your experience and findings through your research. Very pleased. So thank you very much. I would like to now switch to our next presenter, Donata Malacco Canu, who is a senior scientist at the National Institute of Oceanography and Applied Geophysics in Italy. Donata holds a PhD in environmental science from the University of Venice. Her research very much focusing on understanding and modeling the states and processes of marine and coastal aquatic environments, but also relating to anthropogenic uses, pressures, climate change, and natural changes. And also, again, the scale of her studies actually range between the individual to more of a basin scale. So we very much welcome Donata. If you could switch on your camera and join us, we are very much looking forward to your presentation as well. So, Donata, the floor is yours.
Hello. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Presentation
mode. I will go in the presentation mode. Thank you. Thank you a lot for inviting me. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased and honored to be here. Today I'm going to talk about policy and communication priorities in ocean acidification in the Mediterranean Sea. And I would like to acknowledge my colleagues Roberta Guerra and Charles Gallier, with whom I collaborated in developing this study. And the main questions that I'm going to address are, is ocean acidification adequately communicated and addressed in the global indicators, and how is it addressed by governance, and which are the main gaps and needs? Ocean acidification, we said, or just said that is a threat to marine systems and to the goods and services they provide, and it occurs at different temporal and spatial scales, and direct and indirect effects, with direct and indirect effects to marine ecosystems and to ecosystem functions and services. It also occurs in synergies with other pressures and other drivers, sometimes enhancing and sometimes reducing its impacts. And moreover, climate change projections are expected to worsen these impacts in general. And however, in the last year, it seems that ocean acidification is less present in the public perceptions and also in stakeholder perception, probably also due to the presence of other issues that are more visible and easily to understandable to the public opinion. So there is therefore still a constant need to communicate the results of the scientific assessment to the public and to the policymakers. Ocean Acidification Research Network is very active globally and also in the Mediterranean. These networks are primarily devoted to detect, understand, and assess ocean acidification and set best practices, make capacity building and training, and also provide messages and information to policymakers and the general public. And thanks to the work done by these networks, ocean acidification has taken into account in several indicators like global climate indicators, in the Sustainable Development Goal 14, life below water, also in the Ocean Health Index, and in the Marine Copernicus indicators on climate change as well. And however, ocean acidification in itself has not been taken into account at the global level by a single treaty, but it's taken into account by different treaties, for example, by the UNFCCC for climate, by UN clause for pollution prevention, and by the CBD for the biodiversity. And therefore, there is a kind of lack of coordinated efforts and coordination among these different aspects that tackle the ocean acidification issue at a policy level. And also in the Mediterranean Sea, there's still missing a general framework that addresses the ocean acidification from the climate to the pollution prevention to the conservation perspective altogether. And considering a recent study that reviewed ocean acidification policy in the European and related activities, this study shows a lack of governance coordination and also a lack of reporting by the majority of the member states of ocean acidification descriptors, which are instead expected to be adopted by the Marine Strategic Framework Directive. So this study calls for more coordinated approach between different scales and sectors of governance, considering, again, the climate conservation and the environmental protection. In fact, ocean acidification is a problem that goes from different spatial and temporal scales, and therefore also the research, the response in the research and in the governance need to be addressed at different spatial scales and with different tools. Considering the research networks, there are many at different spatial scales, and they are coordinating quite well. But considering the governance, there is still a need to improve the coordinated efforts at the spatial scales, but also among different fields, as I said, from climate to adaptation to conservation. So from the global to the local. So my last take-home message that there is a need to unify and coordinate global treaties regarding ocean acidification, and also in the Mediterranean context, to improve global efforts and local mitigation and adaptation processes. There is also a need in improving communication on ocean acidification threats and also the related uncertainty to make threats and impacts more visible to the public and to policymakers. And the ocean decades and events can be a good way to do this. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Donata. You were also very good, not only sticking to the time, but very concise, clear messages, and the take-home messages. So you kind of already answered one of my questions that I was going to ask you, and that would be exactly why ocean acidification gets much less attention, particularly in the media, compared to plastic. And you kind of already answered that, saying, well, it's much more invisible. So maybe that's one of the reasons. So instead, I think I'll ask you a question about the transnational being, a transnational global threat. So it actually calls for transnational coordinating efforts. So what are the most relevant results in terms of coordinating governance in the last year? I think you put some very clear take-home message in the need to kind of unify, coordinate, and collaborate and finding synergies between global treaties and conventions. So that's very much important. But if you can kind of maybe elaborate a little bit about the governance or coordinating efforts in the last years. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for the question, Minna. I think that in the last years, a lot of work was done in the frameworks of the research networks that made also a good job in vehiculating the ocean acidification needs up to the governance agenda. In fact, the inclusion of the ocean acidification in the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as in the climate indicators, are, I think, a very good success of this of the work of these networks. And still, coordination efforts are needed to approach ocean acidification from the wider perspective instead of from the sectoral perspective at the governance level as it is now.
Excellent, thank you very much. So I know there's a lot of different alliances, groups and network out there, but we're all part of the same cause. So excellent to have your perspective on that. I would now like to turn to the final speaker as part of this first part of today's webinar. So I'd like to introduce Naira Shaltud, who is the Associate Professor of Marine Chemistry at the National Institute of Oceanography and Fisheries in Egypt. A warm welcome to you, Naira. If you could also turn on your camera and join us. We were very much interesting to hear your presentation and share your reflections on how this ocean acidification and work is in the southern part of the Mediterranean. Naira, if you could switch on your camera and unmute yourself.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
Yes, there you are. We can now see you and hear you, and we have the presentation up on the screen. So we'd like to hear from you.
For the invitation and the contribution in this very important event. And thanks for the organizers for inviting me. My presentation today will investigate or will make a spot on how to better engage 1,000 Mediterranean countries in ocean acidification research. Over the past decades, the ocean acidification research community has grown rapidly, and the number of publications related has grown exponentially, as you can notice from the following figures. Recalling that the slide presented in Patricia Siver, our colleagues in presentation, she investigated how growing the publication in ocean acidification research in Mediterranean countries and how far the gaps between the North Mediterranean countries, European countries, and non-European countries, it's the North African countries. One can notice how big the difference in publication between these countries, which make it arise and a warning question, what's the difference and what's the needs to cover these gaps? Ocean acidification is a global issue, but it has, excuse me, just 1 minute, I need to minimize this screen. Okay, thank you. But it has, differs depending on environmental, such as sensitivity of the local species, and it's also differ according to the uses of the ocean and its resources. The lack of information and the lack of availability of instrumentation are the main challenges for South Mediterranean countries for the establishments and of sustained measurements of chemistry, monitoring of ocean acidification, and monitoring of biological impacts assessment of OA. So it's very important to decrease the gaps between countries and bring all the countries to the similar ground of information in order to achieve the goals of conserving the environment, conserving the biodiversity, saving economic resources of each country, decreasing the socio-economic impact, and increasing the regional cooperation of all Mediterranean countries. Way to go. It's building capacity. It's the essential key factor to fill the gaps and the inclusion of South Mediterranean countries to ocean acidification research. The second is increasing cooperation, integration, and exchange of knowledge between North and South Mediterranean countries, researchers, which is the starting point to gain our aim. Establishment of regional centers of excellence in South Mediterranean countries under supervision of experts from North Mediterranean countries for sample analysis and training, including more advanced training in data quality control. And this will be the key to ensure high quality data measurements and ease of measurements in South Mediterranean countries. The last is development of low cost and simple to use equipment and reference material, which will be essential for the ongoing success of the research in this work. Coming back to our colleague Abed's presentation, who identified that GOA-ON plays an important role in ocean acidification research community, and they identified or created 8 regional hubs to raise the awareness and bring the geographical specific coordination of local expertise to address the needs on the gaps of ocean acidification monitoring. One of these hubs is the Mediterranean hubs, who Abed give a lot of information about it. This made the creation of these hubs made the local and regional collaboration among scientists from Mediterranean countries more applicable and coordinates localized knowledge of potential socio-economic impacts. In addition, GOA-ON and in cooperation with International Atomic Agency, OAICC, and the Ocean Foundation, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, and partners from the scientific community, local and regional stakeholders, supports the low-economic countries scientists entering the field of ocean acidification through more training, mentorship, equipment, providing refined approach for tracking biological impacts and stimulated development of lower cost methodology and technology allowing for wider participation of scientists. They organized training courses in focus on chemistry, biology, data measurements, and on level basics and advanced training courses. Depending on additional resources, they have also been developed database and best practice and online discussion portal, which identified also by Abed. It's Ocean Acidification Information Exchange portal, which enable researchers from each hub has its online portal. So the researcher from low Southern Mediterranean can easily interact and communicate, ask, go and chatting, and share experience with other experts from other countries. In response to lack instrumentation, simplified methods and kits of equipment to measure quality, pH, and total alkalinity known as GOA-ON kit in a box was provided and was evaluated and provided by Ocean Foundation. GOA-ON also launched the peer-to-peer program, which facilitates the interaction and mentorship between experts and researchers from other countries by matching experiences and of the early career research and also scholarships and advances. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naira, for helping us to shed a bit of light and illustrating, that the ocean acidification is not equally studied in the Mediterranean. You mentioned getting some support also from the Ocean Foundation, but kits, etc. But in general, in your view, how can we better engage the Southern Mediterranean countries in ocean acidification research? So how can you better engage them? And then also, what would be the best way to solve this data, so to say, or the research?
For the first, I think this is the basic training for chemistry and biology monitoring. Most of the researchers in Mediterranean get this trainings. And the actual need is for the instrumentation, for the kits providing, and raise funding for projects between collaboration projects, because people involved in collaboration and scientific projects learns a lot, and it makes an outline for how to get identified data, the needed data, and the researcher from Southern Mediterranean will be more involved and more guided throughout all the running projects. That will lead to clearly and highly impacted the research.
Thank you very much. So that doesn't sound like it would be a huge investment if you just could invest in kind of knowledge sharing, yes, the technology, the toolkits, and then having means to engage. But thank you very much, and thank you for us today and for sharing your expertise and for all the great work that you're doing. So we're now going to move into the second part of this webinar today, which would be a panel discussion with different representatives from industry, government agencies, etc. So our dear colleagues who you've been introduced to before, Abed, will actually be moderating this next session. And Abed, he holds a PhD in oceanology, and he's a research associate at the National Center for Marine Science, which is affiliated with the CNRS of Lebanon. It's a governmental research institution, and he's very much interested in long-term biochemistry and phytoplankton studies, also in the context of climate change. He has published many scientific papers, also been a mentor to many other students and upcoming emerging scientists, but also is very active in many different networks and groups, and also obviously the co-founder of the OA Med Hub. Very welcome, and I leave the floor to you to moderate this next part for the panelists. So thank you all. Floor is yours, Abed.
Thank you so much, Mina, for your introduction and for moderating the first part of our session. It was really very interesting and full of nice ocean acidification information. Thanks also for our speakers, the great speakers. I would like to start this part of our session by welcoming our panelists. I would like to thank you again, dear panelists, for being here with us. So welcome to Mr. Bruno Ghiami, the representative of the European Mollusks Producers Association, the EMPA, Mr. Miguel Bernal, the representative of the GFCM, the General Fisheries Commission for the Mediterranean, which is affiliated to the FAO, Mr. Alessio Satta, the head of the Med-Sea Foundation, Mr. Vahak Nkabakian, the representative of the Climate Change Department in the Lebanese Ministry of the Environment, and Mr. Peter Swarzenski, the director of the IAEA in Monaco. Hi, Peter. And least but not least, I would like to welcome Mrs. Jessie Turner, the representative of the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification, and she's based actually in the US. So you are all welcome between us here. So I'll start this conversation with Mr. Bruno Ghiami because he's our stakeholder. So in order to, because based on on what we've heard from our speakers earlier during the first part, about the effects of climate change, mainly ocean acidification on marine resources. So my question for you, Mr. Bruno, did you observe any detected effects that have been related to climate change in general, or maybe to ocean acidification in particular, in European farms?
Thank you for the invitation. What I can say is very simple. We observe from a decade a strong degradation of the quality of the water. Maybe I'm going to cut my song because you heard the translation at the same time.
You can go ahead, no problem.
Okay.
Just in order, yeah.
That's done.
Yes.
Okay, that's done. It's better. Yeah. So what I say, we are not very aware about acidification. That's a word we heard from the first time 5 years ago in the frame of representation in the Advisory Council on Aquaculture by a colleague of yours. And as it has been said, it's something which is not that people don't sow. And so we are not very aware about that. What we know today and not tomorrow is that we have a strong degradation of the quality of the waters from 2 decades in the EU. That's low, but that's constant. And we observed very important mortality of our products, which are very sensitive. You know that the invertebrates and the mollusks are very sensitive. They are sentinel of the environment, and we observe, especially for oysters, but also for mussel, something which is strong. In routine, we have 50% of the production which die. For the products, it's impressive.
Did you attribute a direct, let's say, driver of this high mortality of the oysters?
So it's complicated because the scientists who investigated that tell us that there is a multi-factor problem, causality, between environment, contaminants, pathogens, and there is a complex interaction between all of that. But indeed, that's clear. We use mollusks as ecotoxicity tests in many scientific studies. When we don't know what is the reason, we put the mollusk into the water and we see if it survives, if it grows, if it reproduces, and if the products of the reproduction complete the loop.
That's extremely interesting. So as I understood from your speech, that you are already cooperating with scientists actually who are checking the effects and checking also the drivers of these mortalities maybe, right?
Yes, we are. It's difficult to say if it is directly acidification.
No, not related just to ocean acidification, but maybe to other also climate change drivers.
Globally, the quality of the water is decreasing, and clearly the increase of the temperature is one of the factors. There is a direct link between mortalities and increasing temperatures in the water. Clearly, that is demonstrated. There is a threshold, and then when we over that threshold, it's a real problem for the products to survive.
Very interesting. And do you have just in mind like the most critical or the powerful driver that's affecting the European farms? Let's say maybe warming, maybe the pollution, maybe it's not climate change related effect. So based on your experience.
Based on our experience, for us, the main problem is the quality of the water, in which acidification in one of the factors, but not the sole. The contaminant from anthropic activities, anthropogenic activities, is continuing despite whatever people say, despite the regulation of the Water Framework Directive, and it's very complicated. I know that it's very complicated, but it's also a problem because we are EU citizens, are people living inland, especially including those living on the shore, but that people do prefer watch what's happened inland, not in water. Water is something like for recreational activities and for the main people, that's all. And that's not sufficient. People have to understand that the quality of the water is the source of the life in the planet. And if it is not in good quality and quantity, we cannot survive. That's so very simple for us. We are in water every day of the year.
Exactly.
So we know that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bruno, and for actually showing the importance of studying like multi-stressors on these farms. This is very important. So I will orient my question now to Mr. Miguel Bernal from the FAO. So from your own expertise, Mr. Miguel, did you relate fisheries patterns or maybe other seafood-related seafood resources to any climate change consequence? Not necessarily ocean acidification, but in general to any climate change consequence in the Med?
Thank you, Abed, and thank you very much, the organizers, for inviting us here. Well, as it has been said several times here already, I think there aren't many studies that address directly the impact of ocean acidification on fish and some other fisheries resources. Mainly, there are already some studies linking it to mussels and to red corals and other species that for which ocean acidification have a direct impact. But as you say, what we are observing is a combination of impacts that are already having an effect on fishery resources. Particularly the Mediterranean, as you probably all know, is a hotspot for climate change as well. It's warming faster than most of the other regions in the world. And we are observing a combined impact of warming plus the appearance of non-indigenous species, plus changes in circulation, plus the impact of extreme events. So this is already clear in our databases. This is already obvious as of today. And the predictions are saying that this is going to intensify in the next 50 years. So actually in the GFCM, in the General Fisheries Commission for the Mediterranean, we are currently working on an assessment of vulnerability of fisheries to the combined impact of climate change and non-indigenous species. This vulnerability is already, this assessment, is already clearly showing that there are differences in between regions, in between zones, and there are some of the sector that is expected to have an important impact. What is important for us is that the resilience of some of this fishing sector is not very high. When we are speaking about small-scale fisheries and probably this pandemic that we are living on today with the COVID-19 disease is showing us that some of these sectors suffer a lot when there are crises, when there are external or additional, let's say, pressures on them. On the other hand, what we are seeing is that they are quite capable of adapting and changing quickly to in reaction to this.
That's the problem with necessary here, just to ask you, Mr. Miguel, sorry for the interruption actually, but which kind of policies do we need in the Mediterranean Sea in order to improve, the resilience of these marine critical seafood, and also to protect the most vulnerable communities as well, the fishermen communities, as long as we are already seeing effects, as you mentioned.
So, as I was saying a little bit, the problem here is that there is a number of cumulative impacts on the resources and on the sector. And the first thing and the best thing we can do is to improve the status of the resources these communities are living on. So right now in the Mediterranean, unfortunately, we have an overall state of overexploitation of resources. The resources are being exploited in a way that is not sustainable in general terms. So any additional impact, any additional stress, including from ocean acidification or climate change, is only going to make things worse. The best thing we can do right now is to improve the situation of these resources, to improve the management mechanisms, to make them more efficient as a way to allow these communities to be more resilient, as I was saying. So the only problem is that when we speak about climate change and ocean acidification, this is something that requires a lot of commitment and to address things that are very uncertain. So right now, our plan is to keep improving the management capacity of the countries, keep improving as much as possible the situation of the fisheries resources, and find also mechanisms to assist those communities that are at risk or are particularly vulnerable to these impacts.
Here, maybe actually it would be very necessary to take also the opinion of a conservationist and non-environmentalist in the Mediterranean, Mr. Alessio Satta. So, Mr. Alessio, do you think that marine protected areas are efficient in enhancing the Mediterranean ecosystem's resilience against climate change in general and against ocean acidification specifically?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Abad, for inviting me to this very interesting meeting. I would say that MPA are one of the key, one of the solution, of course. And MPA are efficient. Those that are well managed are efficient. They cope with the most of threats that actually the Mediterranean Sea is facing, climate and non-climate drivers, of course. What I would say is that we need more MPAs. We need more efforts in establishing new MPAs. We need to be more, let's say, ambitious in terms of the total surface that need to be protected. And as for ocean acidification, for example, I would say that we still need to bridge the gap between science and decision makers and managers. But if I consider MPA managers, but also coastal wetland managers in the Mediterranean, I see that ocean acidification is not really in the top of their priority. Like, for example, as for plastics, just consider these two things, ocean acidification and marine litter. Marine litter now, as climate change, is in the top of political agenda, decision-making, action, etc. But an ocean acidification not. Why? And most of all, is ocean acidification, let's say, more impactful than plastic, for example? I believe yes. I believe that we should take ocean acidification into account, at least as we do for plastics, for marine litter. But this is a matter, in my opinion, of really bridging the gap and finding also a better way to communicate through ocean literacy, through other tools to communicate the ocean acidification to other actors that are not scientists. And this is what we are sometimes trying to do with our projects and activities.
My question here for you, Alessio, is we know that in the Mediterranean it's complicated. There is so much overlap of international waters in the Mediterranean. Is this a limit to better maybe insist on the governments to expand MPAs in the Mediterranean?
Yeah, definitely. And the most successful MPAs are those, for example, that are in which fishermen has a clear role, in which fishermen immediately realize the advantage of having specific areas and the buffer effect of having an MPA. And this is demonstrated already, where MPAs are well designed with the full involvement of the main actors that are fishermen, but also tourism activities. Of course, these are successful and they produce what they have. So they produce maintenance of biodiversity, but they also produce benefits, also economical benefits for all those that are involved. So government has a role, but I would say the NGO has a role. But this, I really believe that bottom-up processes are more efficient, and when there is a community that strongly is willing for an MPA, government has to follow.
Well, thank you so much, Alessio. Now, I think I can address my questions to our actual policymaker, Vahak Kabakyan from the Ministry of Environment. So, well, we are aware about the current problems in Lebanon, Vahak, but are there long-term strategies previously adopted by the government to improve the resilience of the short Lebanese coastline, for example, which is inhabited by more than 70% of the Lebanese population?
Thanks, Abed, and thanks for having me here. It's a tricky question, but I can give you an example on how, even if there's an entity who is willing to actually promulgate, since we're talking about MPAs, how different departments or ministries would come into conflict. There was a certain area where it was being proposed by the Ministry of Environment in this case, several areas actually, which one of them, to be designated as MPA. But then one of those sites coincided with the site that another ministry was planning to install a power plant. And the request came from that ministry saying, could you move the MPA a bit far from that site? We're not there yet, but what's important is linking back to the discussions that we're having. There's a quite lack of information that is out there. Information might be available, but it usually doesn't used or uptaken by the various entities. So that's one point. The second is, it's still not at the level, specifically this topic, at the level where, at least in Lebanon, where it is part of each of the various policies and strategies and plans. We still don't have an integrated way of thinking. It's always if I have a national policy on let's say tourism, it only looks at it from a narrow perspective. It doesn't go beyond that. If I have a strategy or a plan on electricity and energy, it only looks at that and doesn't consider the rest, and so on and so forth. It could also be similar with a climate perspective whenever strategies are out. Let me take this opportunity to also inform you that we did table our updated Paris commitments, which 10 days ago actually, which does have a wider adaptation angle than it did back in 2015. But again,
may I ask you, Vahak, about something? Because as we know, ocean acidification is something related to climate change and to the CO2 emissions. So are you, as a ministry, doing, what are you doing actually to promote for CO2 emissions quota, monitoring industrial CO2 emissions, things like this? So directly to the solution, if there is any.
So very much, we have a new target. So that's reduction of 20 to 31% of greenhouse gases by 2030. And coupled with, higher renewable, more low carbon transports, and a wider range of adaptation. But going back to your question and linking Lebanon's emission, and this is not it's not our fault, sort of a statement, but Lebanon emits 0.06% of global emissions. So even if we turn off our complete emissions, that wouldn't have a major impact in terms of CO2. It wouldn't have any major impact on acidification, ocean acidification. So that's something to keep in mind. But that doesn't mean we should not be aiming at having those policies in place, which we have, at least at the national level, in reducing our emissions to the extent possible by 2030.
Okay. And just a last question, how do you rate from 1 to 10 the governmental awareness about climate change consequences in the sea, such as ocean acidification and other drivers? From 1 to 10,
okay, I would probably say maximum 2, and I'm giving credit to the Minister of Agriculture in this case.
That's so embarrassing. Okay, thank you so much, Vahak. My question now is to Peter from the IAA of Monaco. As we all know, the IAA is known as one of the best supportive organizations for ocean acidification research in the Mediterranean and beyond. I was just reading by a post by Trevor Eakes on the Ocean Acidification Information Exchange about the progress of ocean acidification research. He mentioned that 8,425 papers are stored in the OAICC database so far. But is there an interlink, Peter, between research and policy making in your strategy as an IAEA, as an international institution?
Great. Thank you very much, Abed. I wanted to thank you for inviting me to this excellent and exciting forum, and I wanted to thank IUCN for hosting this. Excellent question, Abed, and I'm happy to give you my perspectives on this, and I will follow up with what you just said. There was a paper that just was posted on the news stream about a potential solution to the CO2 problem in the Mediterranean, the alkalinization issue. And this is a paper that just came out. It was by, I think, Blumenschön et al., so 4 Italian modelers that highlighted the unique attributes of the Mediterranean. And I think there are definitely things that the IEA and the OAICC, so the Ocean Acidification International Coordination Center, sits at this beautiful confluence between dissemination, between science, and between capacity building. And I think we have a really key role to play in developing and utilizing nuclear techniques to, for example, address alkalinization and specifically the biological response of alkalinization, but then to be able to convey this up to governance and to policy. And I think this is one exciting aspect of the work that we do here at the OAICC.
May I ask you, Peter, well, the IAEA has funded tons of CRPs. So how the results of the IAEA-funded projects are promoted or communicated to policymakers in order to take tangible actions, maybe, or to the government or things like this?
Okay, so how do we convey the results of a project further? And I think I can give you an example for OA Africa. The OAICC has been involved in moving in building capacity in Africa on ocean acidification, and there are now 3 white papers that have been developed for OA Africa, and we are working with this regional hub to develop policy papers and eventually scientific papers that can be used to advocate for ocean acidification in Africa. So that's one example.
That's extremely interesting. But do you have this like direct relationship, or let's say conveying the results directly to politicians, or because that would be something, significant, and
so,
what we are missing actually.
So let me back a little bit. I worked for the International Atomic Energy Agency, and you might wonder why they would be interested in ocean acidification or ocean change. And I think we should start thinking about it as ocean change, because it's deoxygenation and warming as well as pollution and acidification. And I think we need to work with the correct entities that allow us to speak to governance and to policymakers. And for example, the Monaco Foundation is one such example. I think there's great strengths in UN entities. So working with FAO and IOC to promote the impacts of ocean change on up, I think is very important. And we have avenues to do that at international fora, such as at the COP26 in Glasgow, scheduled for November.
We so much appreciate the work of the IAEA, Peter. And we've heard earlier about the imbalance of ocean acidification research and the fund between North and South Mediterranean countries. How the IAEA is doing to improve maybe this OA research balance in the Med?
Yeah, I think this was brought up very nicely by Naira, that there is an imbalance in the work that is going on. And to me, the Med is a model of how the ocean performs on ocean change. And let me just run quickly through some of the things that I think put the Med in the spotlight on ocean acidification. We have variable anthropogenic pressures. We have lots of shipping. We have submarine groundwater discharge, so coastal groundwater discharge that is impacted by us living along the coasts, that perform some form of buffer. We have CO2 vents. Patricia spoke to these very nicely. We have, as Miguel mentioned, we have warming, accelerated warming. We have unique invasive species. So we have all these things, and I think the OAICC has a very unique role to play in building capacity across the Mediterranean. So specifically working with countries, we have the means to help build capacity in countries that are maybe not as in the forefront as Italy and France. I'm thinking now of Patricia's presentation, but I think there's lots to be done, and I think together we really are able to move the goalposts further on ocean acidification.
That's for sure. And yeah, collaborating and teaming up is the key, actually. So thank you, Peter. It's time now to get advices from and the perspective, the international perspective of our US panelist, Jesse Turner. Your work at the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification has been widely recognized recently. You've been doing great work, Jesse. So based on the previous interventions and your expertise in ocean acidification policies, could you give us a few advices that can be applied to improve ocean acidification policies in the Med?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Abed. It's a wonderful discussion here this afternoon at Monaco Ocean Week, and really delighted to be part of it. And just for a little bit of context, the Ocean Acidification Alliance, or the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification, which I have the unique pleasure of being the project manager for, has been working since about 2016 to engage governments, both national and subnational governments, as well as other partners, stakeholders like industry seafood growers, local shellfish farmers, and other associations, universities, NGOs around tackling this large discussion, which has been so beautifully discussed today, which is how do we move the needle on both advancing and accelerating science and knowledge around ocean and coastal acidification relative to these other climate drivers, and how do we communicate that to policymakers in a way that inspires action. And so, as you heard so much, this afternoon was fantastic. The Mediterranean has such a unique wealth of sustained collaboration around the OA science and research and partnership building around disseminating this information for usable local interventions and strategies. We talked a little bit about the food web impacts as well, and some of these discussions, and how we start to target science to talk a little bit more about the whole system change and these multiple drivers. But I think the discussion that really sticks out to me, and is the one that rattles around in my mind all the time, is, why don't policymakers know about or seem overly concerned about ocean acidification? We talk about the perception of threat, being harder to describe, and that we've got these global signals, but we don't have a lot of coastal, trends information, and talking about that local threat starting to emerge. And I think the biggest answer to that question for me is that policymakers, they want to do something. We want to take action, and with ocean acidification, they're sort of like, well, we're already reducing global emissions, as the number one cause of ocean acidification. What more do you want us to do? And so we, through the Alliance and through partners, everyone here, are starting to explore these questions of what does it mean to address ocean acidification in addition to reducing carbon emissions. And so we're starting to talk about things like reducing land-based pollutions, local runoff that add nutrients and can exacerbate ocean acidification and deoxygenation. Thinking about using nature-based solutions like kelp and salt marsh, seagrass, mangroves, that coastal shoreline restoration and conservation that can help remediate or ameliorate local impacts of coastal acidification and reduce some of that stress near shore for species calcifiers in the region. And then thinking about, these really targeted discussions around local vulnerabilities of communities and species. And then how do you prioritize research that will help inform the adaptive potential? So a lot of the discussions that Bruno was bringing out, and thinking about how do we know, what the drivers are and what our crops reaction is going to be. So those are all the types of things that we sort of need to be linking together under this discussion of climate ocean change. And those are the things we're really trying to bring policymakers' attention to. And as previous presenters have talked about, it's across very different scales, regional and local. But that's really where we want to start moving the discussion, and so many partners have been engaged in that leadership. One thing I did want to add, about MPAs, and MPAs, of course, are a critical tool that we have, and that all the emerging goals of 30 by 30 are really important. And we also know that the water, because of climate change, is continuing to warm, continuing to acidify and lose oxygen. So how do we think about tools like MPAs being even more climate capable? And how can we utilize those types of existing efforts to better monitor for this coastal change, so we understand where local interventions are most needed, and how can we, use those to help evaluate what those local strategies might look like. So that's sort of how we can think about these as co-beneficial and mutually enforcing the type of information and knowledge we need to really give policymakers something local and regionalized to do.
Thank you so much, Jessie, for this very enriching, actually, perspective and potential solutions. We hope that our policymakers, because this video, actually, this session will be recorded, and we hope that after the dissemination among the policymakers community as well in the Med, they can take into consideration a few actions, because actually there are so much solutions there. However, the implementation is the key, right? So we need to implement and to take tangible actions. That's the point. So I would like to thank all our panelists, really. Thank you so much. And everyone gave a very important perspective of the ocean acidification problem and the climate change problem in general. So I would leave the floor to Mina Epps in order to close the session. The session should be recorded, and it will be published later on our platforms. Thank you so much, everyone. Mina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm really taken by this really rich discussions. It's been fascinating listening to everyone and all the great collaborations that we've heard. And thank you, Abed, for excellent moderation and getting this group together. Very grateful for your time. So we've heard about, the need to kind of implement the management plans. We heard about MPAs as a critical tool, but also not just MPAs, but the effective and efficient management of MPAs is crucial, as well as making them climate smart. And also some really good examples of successful and the clear role of if you can do MPAs also that adjacent kind of communities can actually see this benefit at a local level, and all the efforts that has been done to really get this attention to policymakers. We heard everything from bottom-up approaches, but also highlighted from our government agents representative, the need to work across different ministries and also sectors to have this approach and, to stop working in silos. But in terms of, I really like your style and intervention, Abed, are really kind of prompting for, concrete actions that we can do, and, what are the targets that can be set and how do we follow up and measure them, more importantly, and also in a transparent way. We heard about Lebanon having a new target, kind of addressing the one cause, reducing CO2 emissions. And also very interesting to listen to IAEA on terms of the nuclear technologies and seeing that avenue and how that can actually be conveyed to policymakers and how they're working with different partners on that. And also, I believe Peter really highlighted the deadly trio, that it doesn't come in isolation, and what can you actually do to do that? How do you address it? And highlighting that there are avenues to address these factors at very many international fora and upcoming events, notably Glasgow is coming up. We also have the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the World Conservation Congress. We have the COP, which is also addressing the climate change and biodiversity nexus, and many, many, many more in that. And we're seeing more ocean debates and climate summits, etc. And it's really obvious how much ocean has actually entered into the climate change debate at the international discussions at the policy level. And then I think so to some of Jesse's point, coming from a global perspective, but actually zooming down to local level, and that managers and practitioners, they also want to address this. They want to do something. They want to take action, and how to take action, but also that there was some kind of a, not complacent, but basically justification saying, yes, but we are addressing the number one cause. We are reducing emissions. But, that's not enough. You have to look at other, avenues in terms of reducing runoff from land, etc. And I really like the end point of focusing on nature-based solutions, right? She mentioned, kelp forests and seagrasses, etc., and how you can apply nature-based solutions, which is actually addressing an environmental problem, but in a very holistic way, to look at both, all the different environmental and societal challenges that it comes with it, and addressing that in a holistic way, as well as potential for, I would say, for both fisheries and aquaculture to be nature-based solution. And IUCN has recently, or last year, reduced the first global standard for nature-based solutions. So obviously that is something that we are promoting very, very strongly. I would obviously like to thank deeply from all of us here, all the organizers, all the speakers for your time and effort put into this and adding to this discussion. For all your interesting contribution, but also thanks specifically to all the participants for your active participation and the interesting, the questions. We will also like to highlight that any unanswered questions, or if you would like to basically engage, but have a bit more in-depth with some of the scientists around here or policymakers, we would actually address. So if we can drop in the chat now the link to the Ocean Acidification Information Exchange. You will have to register and sign up, but it's open to all. So it would be great if we could share the link and for people to go on there, register and interact further. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank the members of the International Reference User Group, who have been very active in bringing ocean acidification to the world's attention, and particularly Professor Dan LaFolley, who has been instrumental over a period of about 15 years in getting the network actors engaged and also working together on this very important issue. So we would like to thank the organizers. Thank you very much for providing the platform, and also to the Prince Albert II Foundation, and for their longstanding support on the topic of ocean acidification. We're very, very grateful for that, as well as to other donors and partners such as IAEA and the Swedish Ministry of Environment for your support. And I think, we've heard some excellent, solutions or possible avenues that, we really need to take action. So I would say, let's keep that pressure on. And I think with those final remarks, we're actually well in time. So Abed was kind of generous here with his time. So I would, basically conclude. I think that can conclude our discussion. I will give a final, since we have 2 minutes, if there was any final take-home message or another platform or anything or initiative you'd like to highlight, because as you know, this concludes our RUG project, but we are very keen to see this live on. And I can tell there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm to really continue this. So is there anyone, I see if you put your hand up, if there's anyone from the panel or speakers that would like to bring something to attention, never let a good marketing opportunity go to waste. So if you have anything to promote, please put up your hand. Is there anyone with some final remark? Let's see if I can't see any hands.
They are spared for the OAIE platform, Minna.
Sorry?
They are sparing it for the OAIE platform.
Okay, that's great. So we look forward to seeing you all there later on. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of the Monaco Ocean Week. And we look forward to continuing this collaboration. And once again, from all of us, thank you very, very much. And have a great day or evening where you are. Thank you very much.